what we looked at is how the value and volume of mountain pine beetle impacted trees changes as they move through the mortality stages, going from an infested stand, which is infested with the beetles, as it moves from the green stage into the red stage and then into the gray stage. And the way that we did that was to survey mill owners throughout the state and ask them a multitude and variety of questions about how they view the mountain pine beetle in terms of affecting their logging costs, their stumpage costs, their hauling costs, their milling costs, what the effects of the logs in the different stages of mortality as they dry out have upon equipment, how the operators themselves are able to handle these logs. So, for example, a tree that's in the green stage, which it would be considered dead, although it still appears to be alive because the needles are green, is not as much of a problem in terms of handling as a tree in the later red stage or certainly the gray stage. An example of that would be breakage during handling or breakage during milling, or what the products of the logs, what the products that can come out of the logs can be in those different stages.
Sure.
Due to how the mortality affects the tree.
Well, let me ask you this: does it make it, or does it make a financial difference as to trying to ascertain the condition of the tree, into what stage it is? Does that add to the cost of trying to mill or work with the lumber?
Does it add? I'm sorry. The question is, does it add to the cost?
Yeah. Does it add labor costs or milling costs, depending upon what stage of what progression the tree is in?
We didn't notice so much of and again, without my notes in front of me, we didn't notice so much of an increase in costs for the milling. We certainly noticed an increase in the cost of handling. What we did notice was that mills themselves, and in fact log haulers, and even some of the harvest operators, I was told, although I did not have a chance to interview any of those specifically, will avoid mountain pine beetle impacted trees when they're in the later stages of mortality because they're just too difficult to deal with. One example of that would be hauling, because log haulers get paid by the green ton generally. So they would rather load their truck up with live green trees as opposed to going to a site that had been impacted by the beetle where they're dried out and the truck doesn't make weight.
So is there a continuing market for these damaged trees?
There is a continuing market. What we noticed was how the product mix changes. So in these different stages, what could be considered, say, again, starting with the green stage, what would be considered a saw log or a high-value mill product, as it moves into the red stage where the checking and the cracking starts happening, and then into the gray stage, the product mix will change from going from a saw log, as in the green stage, to when it's in the red stage. It may be suitable for a lower value poster pole, and then the gray stage is where we notice the real decline, where it's going towards fuel wood or pulp wood, if that's even possible, and sometimes even in the red stage, if it's too impacted by the beetle or too far into the red stage, it doesn't have the same value as it would in the green stage. So what we demonstrate is how that product mix changes as the trees move through those different stages.
So is that going to discourage the folks who are doing the cutting to try to go after these logs?
It absolutely discourages them, and that is one of that was highlighted in several interviews that I had, and it's highlighted in the paper that will be released, is that at the height of the epidemic, which was several years ago, mills started looking towards different sources of timber that weren't impacted by the beetle. In fact, they were avoiding them. The mills that we interview, which represented the majority of the sawmills production in the state, use very little beetle-killed trees these days. They look high and low elsewhere for green trees.
So does that mean that the logs or the timber that is dead because of beetle kill won't be attractive enough to pull out, so that at least it might make some sort of a difference in the next fire season?
Well, that could be true. I can't speak to the impact on the fire season. There are people more qualified to do that than I am. But what I had heard, it really depends on the ownership. Private industrial forest landowners, when they experience a beetle attack, they are going to go in and harvest those trees as quickly as possible. Other agencies, public agencies that have legal processes that they have to follow that take longer amounts of time and cannot just jump right in there and get the trees while they still have the highest potential value. Those processes can take often long enough so that by the time it actually gets to bid, they get very little bidders on those offerings. And in fact, I have heard from silviculturists that have entered some of these beetle attack stands from these public forest land ownership agencies. If they, because they know how long the process takes, they are often reluctant to even consider them for sale.